Hello, dear beloveds. We are going to have a glorious time together in this live today. I thought I would like to bring the conversation around intuition. We've been doing lives every day around the interaction of intuition and things like self-reliance, self-sovereignty, spiritual leadership, looking at the interactions of fear and intuition, and really just in every way looking at how intuition is or isn't working in your life and how we can bring you into a fuller expression or fuller relationship with your intuition. So today I thought I'd touch on a topic that we cover in the Initiate program. This is actually one of the core components of the early weeks of the Initiate program, but I want to kind of introduce it to you today because I think there's actually lots of people who get really excited about this particular topic, and that's how do we identify our dominant clair. Now, if that terminology is new to you, I'll just explain. Clair means clear, and it's just usually the prefix to whichever way that you receive your intuition. So it might be clairsentience, to feel, clairaudience, to hear, clairvoyance, my brain's gone, to see, and then claircognizance, which is to know, and that's a faculty of the mind. What I want to do is just kind of break this down a little bit and investigate those terms so that I guess to debunk some of the myths around these ideas specifically. So very often we will use clairvoyance, for example, as a shorthand, as a way to just describe all psychic or intuitive skills that someone might have, but it's actually quite a specific skill, and it's not necessarily accurate to just call all kind of, seeing, spiritual sight, clairvoyance, because in fact, there's a lot more going on than that. So why don't we begin by breaking down those different ways of seeing, and even if you know which one you are, you may be surprised to learn a little bit more about your specific way of seeing, hearing, feeling, or knowing intuition. And if you don't know which one it is, we'll go into a little practice together so you can connect into that. This is really an opportunity to become more intimate with your intuition. And I encourage people, even if you do identify already with a particular clair, to enjoy or embrace the journey of kind of being an explorer with this, because sometimes we can think we know, but what we think we are dominant in may not actually be our primary intuition. It might actually be a secondary or third way of receiving. And when we get to know what our primary clair is, it's like meeting an old friend, and things that you may have previously doubted about your intuitive knowing should become very, very clear. This is a topic when I talk about that people get really excited about, because I think we often feel we are sort of, having this very random or haphazard relationship with our intuition. It visits us when it wants to. We don't get to sort of determine how or when we receive it. But in fact, there is a system to receiving intuition, and there are characteristics of intuition that when we are connected to them, when we understand them, I've talked a lot about the science of intuition, it stops being so random, and it actually becomes a situation where we feel like we can manage, control, and activate our intuition in a more powerful way. So let's talk about the four clairs, and then I'll help you to identify or deepen into your relationship with your clair. Remembering that your relationship to your intuition is lifelong, and it's like any relationship. If you don't show up to it, if you don't keep giving to it, if you don't keep devoting to it, it'll get quite wishy-washy, and then you'll wonder why your intuition isn't feeling so clear. But basically it's because it requires that we allow ourselves time to cultivate our intuition, time to deepen into our intuition, and not to assume that we've ever reached the highest point with our intuition. And this is something that I truly love about my life, is that the more I have given my life over to intuition, the more intuitive I am. I didn't wait until I went, oh my God, okay, well, I'm obviously the most intuitive person on the planet. I might as well, start teaching other people. I had a devotion. And we know that the greatest kind of teacher is a student, a lifelong student, and the teacher and the student archetype really hang out together. And I feel very strongly that with intuition, if you ever feel like you've reached a point where you can get no better, then you better go check your humility, because there's a good chance that you're actually just caught up in your ego, because we can always get better. Because what is intuition? It's our access or our conversation to the one mind. And so that intimacy with God or the one mind is what we're truly working towards. Intuition is just a lovely byproduct or side effect of that, yeah? So when we see intuition as a spiritual path, then our desire to open our intuition will become an act of devotion, and therefore we will never assume that we've gone as far as we can. We will always know we can do better, and we will always seek out the teachers and the programs and the places that will allow us to go deeper and further with our intuition. And that's exactly what I do, because I never want to feel like, and I know I haven't reached anywhere near the point where I'm at the full expression of my intuition. So, on to the clairs, Ricky. I'm full of beans today because today is the second last day before the Initiate program closes, and I'm feeling very excited. I'm seeing such incredible women signing up for this program. All women so far. This is a program men are allowed into, but I'm not very good at talking to men. I think I'm much more comfortable talking to women. But this program does close tomorrow, so I'm, obviously been doing lots of lives this week, but this is what I love to do. And as we get really close to that cart closing, talking about this stuff gets me very excited. So the first I'm going to talk about is clairsentience, and that's because that's what I am, and so I'm very confident in helping you understand it. I love talking about clairsentience as well, which means clear feeling, because there are so many misnomers around clairsentience. It often gets very confused with being empathic or highly sensitive. No. Clairsentience is a highly sophisticated way to receive non-local intuition. In other words, intuition that arrives into you from somewhere outside of you, outside of time and space, outside of this current moment now, and enters in through clairsentience, or is received by your clairsentience so that you can decode it. That is very different to being highly sensitive or empathic, which are biological forms of intuition. They're still forms of intuition, but they are entirely biological. So you are electromagnetic, that is a scientific fact. Your energetic sensitivity is because of your proximity to other people and other sentient life. So you're constantly, your field that is quite naturally produced scientifically by your body is interacting with the fields of everybody around you. If you don't know that's what's happening, of course, you're going to feel highly sensitive and empathic to everybody else's energy, and you may not understand how you can best protect yourself. We'll talk about that more in the Initiate program. Right now, though, I want to differentiate that very strongly from the idea of clairsentience, which is about non-local intuition and is about receiving information from outside of time and space, okay? So that's what non-local intuition is. It's where we receive knowledge that we do not know. We do not know how we know. It isn't coming through deduction or logic or reason. It's coming completely outside of time and space, entering into us, and we're receiving it through a felt sense. Now, that felt sense is not necessarily going to be specifically in relationship to the information you're receiving. Let me explain that another way. So say I'm sitting down with a client who has a sore back, and I sit down opposite them and I feel my back sore. I can deduce from the sensation in my body that I have intuited what that person's receiving. That is not what we're talking about here. That form of intuition is part of your empathy, your highly sensitive, your field picking up the field of the person opposite you. It may be useful for you to share with them. I feel you have a sore back because I'm picking up that in my body. But once you've spoken it, the sensation in your body would and should leave. You are never vulnerable to other people's stuff if you know how to manage this stuff. And it's vital that we teach ourselves how to manage it and how to protect our energy so that we're not left vulnerable to other people's ailments or sickness or anything else. But that's for another live or for the Initiate program. What happens with clairsentience, however, is that I am sitting with a client, or I'm sitting with someone I'm intuiting on behalf of, or with myself, and I get a felt response, a bodily sensation. In my case, it feels like a gentle pressure, and that's when I'll know to start speaking. So if I'm sitting with a client and I'm going through the intuitive intelligence method process with them, or I'm guiding them in some other way, as the intuitive guide is taught to do, I will just feel a pressure in my heart, generally in my heart chakra, that's very gentle and feels very good because it's actually grace entering me. It's that energy of the divine entering me, and I will begin to speak. So I don't feel, speak, feel, speak. It's nothing. It's not like that. It's not a kind of process. It may initially feel like that, but the more you do this, practice, the more you build the muscle, you're going to be in a flow state. When you will know that message or that information is done is because the sensation or the pressure will shift or change. So you may experience a bodily sensation that's slightly different to mine, but when that feeling goes, in the absence of that sensation, you know that you're done talking. Likewise, if I'm talking to the client and sharing the message that's coming non-locally, I may feel in a moment that I used a word that was not quite right. And instantly my body, through that felt sensation, will alert me to the fact that I've stepped away from the meaning that non-local intuition wants to communicate, and I will stop, tune back in through my heart chakra. We know that intuition is a function of the heart brain, and we'll talk about that a lot in the Initiate program. And I just check in again. All of this can happen in under a second, yeah? And then I go back to the word that it should have been, and I continue speaking. So clairsentience is not about you just picking up random crap from other people's fields because they're in close proximity to you. This is you receiving non-local information from the quantum field because you are part of it. And it's my physical that gives me the recognition that the information has arrived and that I can start speaking. I may very well have strong sensation in my third eye or my crown, because part of the method is to learn how to communicate with the chakras, and that will give me good information as to which chakra I'm communing with. But I want you to separate the idea of empathy and energetic sensitivity from this highly sophisticated sentience or clairsentience, because it is as sophisticated as all the other clairs, and it does not leave you vulnerable. It does not make you vulnerable to the feeling states, the physical states, or the emotional states of other people. Okay, so that's clairsentience. If you have questions as we're going along, please chuck them in there. As you can see, there's a lot of beautiful information about the clairs, and I would love to share more, but that will have to be saved for another time or for the program. When we move into the next three, I'll talk about them a little bit in less detail, because I am not, I use all of them in my work, but I definitely have dominant clairsentience, and so the others are then my secondary clairs, and I don't need them or are reliant on them in the same way. However, what will happen when I'm working is that I will get visual information, I will hear, and I will know at the same time or in a similar time frame that I am receiving through my clairsentience. And the more you work with your intuition, the more your clairs will become one. So let's talk about clairvoyance. As I said, this is kind of used as a shorthand. Very often people will just say clairvoyant when what they mean is psychic or intuitive. And they just chuck it out there because it's a way to, it's a shorthand that people seem to understand. But clairvoyance is once again quite specifically using the physical sight in the mind's eye to conjure or bring forth intuition. So what I mean by that is that it's an internal sight. It's very rare, although it does happen, but predominantly 95% of the people who work with clairvoyance will not literally see with their eyes open things moving about in the world, because it's a spiritual sight. It's a symbolic sight. It's not a literal sight. And so even though it's aligned with the dominant sense of sight, just as clairsentience aligned with that dominant sense of touch, we're not talking about a literalness here. If you didn't have a body, you would still be able to receive this, but it is associated with visual representations of intuition. Remembering, intuition is predominantly symbolic. And so if you are clairvoyant, you will often receive information through images, pictures that are associated, and those pictures will add up to create meaning which you decode. Exactly as it was for clairsentience, the feeling itself didn't carry the message. The feeling was the indication that the message was arriving. And when you start receiving with your clairvoyance, the information will flow once the image appears, but only when you start speaking. And this is the thing about it. You may want to wait and sit on that image until the whole thing's downloaded so you feel safe. But as my students discover, if you wait for that long, you will never get the next message, because it's the act of trusting what you're seeing and speaking even when you don't know what's coming next that allows your intuition to flow out of you. So clairvoyance is where you are receiving non-local intuition, usually with your inner sight, your spiritual sight, and you are seeing imagery that you are able to associate and create meaning out of. But that meaning was always non-local. It's not you going, well, I'm seeing a house and it's got a fence around it, so I'm figuring that's where you live, and oh look, it's burning down right now, so sorry, your house is going to burn down. No, we do not function that way. What happens is we see the house and we see the fire, and we intuit through non-local intuition, letting that infinite consciousness speak through us. We are not trying to figure out what these images mean, because our literal humanness will make them literal. And remember, intuition is symbolic and uses symbolism to share information. So I feel into that image of the house on fire, and I say, it's time to let go of the old. It's the death of the old, in fact. Whatever you thought success was, whatever you thought was your safety zone, is coming to an end. And it's going to happen very suddenly and dramatically, but you are very safe. This is a celebratory fire. This is a rebirth. And we know that the forest cannot birth its new life until the seeds are cracked open by intense heat. So go with the process. Okay? Non-local. Don't know who that information was for, but obviously I joke all the time with my students that I can't pretend read. So even in these situations, I'll be like, I'll just give you an example. No, I can never just give you an example. So I hope someone got some meaning out of that one. Okay. So do not get concretized in your imagination by thinking that your symbolism of your clairvoyance means that you're seeing literal imagery. It's very rare that your intuition will communicate literally, because it is symbolic sight, spiritual sight. Yep. Beautiful. So let's move on to claircognizance. Now, in my experience of training hundreds and hundreds of people, claircognizance is predominantly the divine masculine way of receiving. I used to say it was more associated with men, but I've come to understand more fully that the masculine and the feminine is a better way to describe the functioning of these clairs rather than male or female. Women who are more in their masculine energy, as well as men, tend to be more predominantly attuned to claircognizance. Claircognizance can be a tricky little because it uses the faculty of the mind to communicate non-locally, which means you have to be very clear and trusting of yourself so you can separate your ego thinking, your left brain, from your right brain creative intuitive thinking. So you have to get very good at trusting yourself and those impulses of claircognizance. So this is when people say, you'll say to them, how did you know to go and do that thing then? If you hadn't done that, everything would have gone wrong. They say, I just knew. Because they just know, and they have knowing. And as I say, it's very often associated, from my experience, of people who are working strongly with the divine masculine or the masculine energy, because that knowing, that certainty of self, is often more associated with the masculine, that firmness and kind of often rigidity in its shadow form of identity. But in the form of claircognizance, it's absolutely about being able to trust the right brain, intuitive, creative, symbolic knowing, versus the left brain, analytical, trying to work it all out, ego mind. And how do you create space for that claircognizance impulse to come into you? Kylie says, yep, that's me. And it's so powerful when you know that, because then you can start trusting yourself. I remember I had a student a while ago who was almost in tears because at every workshop she felt like a failure. She didn't think she knew how to access her intuition. She constantly doubted herself, and eventually we figured out that she was claircognizant, and so she thought it was just her thinking brain taking over and cutting off her intuition. And when we were able to deduce that actually it was her claircognizance using the faculty of her brilliant mind, she suddenly realized that she'd been intuiting all along, but she'd been dismissing it because she thought she was meant to feel it or see it or hear it. So it's a very powerful thing if you're a claircognizant, because it gives you permission to understand that your intuition is going to come through the dominant masculine faculty of the reasoning mind, and you just have to be really, really on it. And this is where devotion comes in, because you've got to keep a very clear path there, because otherwise, whenever fear rises, you'll go into doubt. Okay. We'll talk about more about how fear impacts on intuition in the Initiate program, because it is obviously the work of my life, obviously because I talk about it all the time. Let's go to the last one now, which is clairaudience. And this one is really interesting as well, because people will often assume that it means that it sounds like someone's just standing next to you talking in your ear, and yet here we are again. We're talking about symbolic hearing, not literal hearing. While sometimes you may feel, hear, or know as though like someone's standing right next to you, and I'm sure you've all had an experience like that. This happens to me quite often in dreams, where I will get woken up out of a dream because it sounds like someone's standing next to me talking in my ear. very often that will happen because I'm late, or I've slept through an alarm, or I need to get up because somebody in my house needs me. And it's like this literal divine intervention, whether you call that angels or your guides, it really doesn't matter. I'm not into naming things. I'm into opening you to your full expression of your God nature. That is different to clairaudience, which is when you intentionally sit down and ask a question on behalf of yourself or a client. You receive that information in an audible way. Now that may sound like someone standing next to you, but more likely it's an internal voice. And once again, we have to be really mindful here. If you have a brain that's constantly working like that in the ego way, that constant mind chatter isn't dismissed, because it could actually be your intuition, but you've just never taken the time to learn how to differentiate between the mind chatter and the clairaudience. Clairaudience is probably the least common, I would say, because I do think that a lot of people dismiss their clairaudience as being mind or mental chatter. And because we don't take the time to actually focus on how to develop our clairaudience or quiet the monkey mind, we dismiss it because it's too hard. For someone to have clairaudience as the first clair is also quite rare. These two often go together, clairsentience and clairaudience. So clairsentience is often the primary intuition it's probably the primary intuition for the majority of people, and then the clairaudience will kick in, and then the clairvoyance will kick in, and then the claircognizance will kick in, or in some order like that. Danny says, me too. I always thought I was dominantly clairsentient, but actually that has been empathic feelings. Yes, it's awesome when we get to know the difference between this. I've always had that knowing, but never knew it was a clair. Already feel stronger since I watched a similar video in the course bundle. Yeah, exactly. We're basically covering very similar content. But this is the thing. I think it is important for us to keep hearing this, because if we don't hear it again and again and again, we go into doubt, yeah? So remembering that your first clair is the one you want to develop most strongly, because that's where the trust comes in. Because as Danny just so beautifully said, when you get really trusting and you suddenly recognize that that is your way, that the infinite's speaking to you, you can lean into it, and you can get really, really good at hearing, seeing, feeling, or knowing it. If you don't know that, then you're going to be having a very wishy-washy relationship. You might be trying to lean into your clairsentience, but you're actually claircognizance, and therefore you're going to be, oh, I'm supposed to be feeling things like everybody else is feeling things, and I'm not feeling things, and then it's all like over. Okay, Rachel says, that's me. I never realized my clairaudience was my own inner voice, so never thought I was audient. Oh my goodness, we're having a breakthrough, Rachel. I didn't know if we would still be having breakthroughs, but we are. How good is that? Anna says, what's the difference between primary and secondary clair? I mostly use clairaudience, but occasionally. So your primary is just what happens first. So if you had a kind of camera and you could slow down time at the moment that you get an intuitive hit, you would see that one kicks in, even if it's a millisecond before the next one. And that one is your primary. And when we do this in the workshops, what we discover is that very often people have been thinking that one is more dominant, and it's actually not their primary. And they've been in doubt about their intuition because of that. So if we could slow down, for me now, because I do it as a living, everything works together, I do often have to pull back and look at which is coming first. And for me, it's always clairsentience. But you will notice that there is, if you could bring that time to, down and just look at it piece, you would probably see, as you say, your clairaudience comes first, and then the next one might be visual, and then the next one might be feeling, and then the next one might be knowing. But eventually, with time and with practice, they all work together. But it's still so worthwhile for us to make really deep, intimate friendship with our primary clair, because that's how we get to go into that trust. The biggest question people bring to me, or the biggest doubt people bring to me, is that they don't trust themselves. And not trusting yourself is saying I don't trust my intuition, and saying I don't trust my intuition is saying I don't trust the infinite. So if I can find a way to help you trust yourself, then I am one step closer to getting you to remember that you are God or the infinite. So it's so powerful for us to break this down, and not just to chuck it all in and go, oh, right, I'll feel my intuition some days and some days I won't. You actually have, as your birthright, the entitlement to hear, feel, and know your intuition with absolute clarity every breath. And when you trust yourself, you won't go into doubt if your intuition is guiding you in a direction that's different to what your ego wants. And it's freedom. And it's bliss and it's joy, and it's why this work matters so much to me, because it's really about you becoming self-sovereigning. It's about meeting yourself with fearlessness and being able to accept willingly your own power. And that is a divine right. I mean, we are creator gods, and it is without question our birthright to know that truth. But doubt is the enemy of intuition. And so this process, no matter how kind of simple it might seem, to me gives us permission to meet ourselves in more and more powerful ways. So that's all I wanted to share with you today. Thank you so much for joining me. I do love talking about this. And if you are considering the Initiate program, I'll say it again, the cart closes tomorrow night, and I would love for you to think about putting your soul, your intuition, your relationship with the infinite at the front and center of your life, because there is simply no other way to have the life of your dreams. So don't wait until your life is in order, because if you want your life to come into the highest possible order, then come join this program. Go on a journey. For me, it's 12 weeks that we get to hang out together, and there's truly a joyful journey. There's nothing more exciting, I think, than to see what happens in such a short amount of time. It's like 3 months, and then you come out the other end of it going, oh my God, fear detox. We're going next level with your intuition. We're being initiated into the cosmic laws, and this is everything you need to build the life that you hold in your mind or on your vision board. Don't wait until that vision board comes to life, because it can't happen until your soul is privileged above all else. Mwah. Thank you so much, dear ones, for joining me. It's such a joy to hang out with you. Loving all the hearts, Anna. You are so good at popping the hearts. Mwah. Have a beautiful day. Bye.